After a few months without visiting my parents, I received an invitation one Saturday afternoon for a family get-together. My parents, my sister, her son, and her husband. Even though I knew my parents favored my sister, who had always been spoiled by them, I decided to go with my son, as I was a single mother. We chatted throughout the afternoon, and my parents continually praised my sister's achievements. When evening came, my parents decided to order dinner delivered, and they told my son and me, "You too will eat the leftovers. It's what you deserve. Oh, and please set the table since you've already had breakfast here." At that moment, I picked up my son and took him to a steakhouse, and then I made a call that would change everything, making my parents, my sister, and her husband bitterly regret what they did to me and my son. Hello, welcome to this channel. Like and subscribe to this channel, enjoy, and turn on notifications. Comment below which city you're watching from. I'd love to hear it, and I'd love to leave a heart in your comment. The last time I was at my parents' house was for a birthday, and even then, marked by formality and forced smiles, the discomfort was inevitable. I was never their pride and joy. This was reserved for my younger sister, the family's darling. While she grew up being fawned over, I grew up being criticized. She received gifts, affection, and attention. I faced pressure, indifference, and occasionally the burden of unfair comparisons. The difference between us: I was the daughter who got pregnant early and raised a child alone. She was the daughter who married well and had a child just as my parents had always dreamed. That Saturday afternoon, while washing the dishes after lunch in my simple, cozy home, my phone vibrated with an unexpected notification, an invitation to a family dinner. The message came directly from my mother's number, short and to the point. "Come have dinner with us tonight. Your sister, her husband, and their little one will be here. Bring your son too." For a moment, I hesitated. This smelled like an emotional trap. But I looked at my son's face, just 8 years old, excited to see me smiling and holding his favorite toy car. He loved seeing his grandparents, even if he'd never received the same kind of affection as his cousin. And against all the memories warning me otherwise, I decided to accept. We arrived late in the afternoon. The house was as always, spotless, with the scent of freshly cut flowers and gleaming furniture. My mother greeted us with a smile too polite to be sincere. My father, as usual, waved lazily from the couch. The only person genuinely happy to see us was his nephew, who ran over to play with my son, which brought me brief relief. The conversation throughout the afternoon revolved, as always, around my sister. Her husband's new position at the company, the expensive kitchen renovation, the photos from their son's birthday party, a party I wasn't even invited to. I remained silent, like a decorative piece that didn't fit in with the surroundings. Whenever I tried to talk about my work, or my son's small achievements, my parents changed the subject or glanced at the clock, as if the time spent with me was wasted. As the sun set and night fell, my parents decided to order food. Pizza, Japanese food, and a few appetizers. They ordered directly from the app, discussing my sister and her husband's favorite flavors. And then, without any ceremony, my mother looked at me and said, "You too go eat the leftovers. It's what you deserve. Oh, and since you had breakfast here, be so kind as to set the table, okay?" My stomach churned, but not from hunger. It was indignation. My son looked at me confused, trying to understand if this was a joke, but it wasn't. They were serious. I went to the kitchen, washed my hands, took a deep breath, and returned to the living room. I took my son by the hand, bent down slightly to his level, and said, "Let's go out to dinner, my love." A place of our own. Before anyone could say anything, we left. I got in the car with my heart racing, but not with sadness, but with determination. At that moment, something inside me snapped, and I realized that, for the first time, there was no turning back. We arrived at a simple but welcoming steakhouse. We sat down, ate well, laughed, and at the end of the meal, while my son enjoyed some flake ice cream, I picked up my cell phone and made a call. A single phone call. It was that phone call that changed everything. And that night, a new story began to unfold, a story where those who had always been demeaned, rejected, and humiliated would find a way to rise up. And when the sun rose the next day, my parents, my sister, and her husband would see a side of me they never imagined. And they would regret it bitterly. While my son was distracted by drawing on the children's paper the waiter brought along with colored pencils, I grabbed my phone with steady hands and searched for a contact I didn't use via Messi's, Dona Lourdes, and the real estate agency. Before dialing, I looked around the steakhouse. People chatting, waiters bustling about, families smiling. It was a stark contrast to what had just happened at my parents' house. "Hello, Mrs. Lourdes." My voice came out calm. "This is Marcella, do you remember me?" She remembered. After all, less than a year ago, I had turned down an offer to buy a house with an attached lot next to my parents' house. My parents had made a point of saying it would be intrusive to see me living so close, and at the time, I'd given in. But now, I was ready to reconsider. "Is that house still available?" Dona Lourdes confirmed it was. The owner had temporarily withdrawn the sale, but had retracted his decision the week before. I asked to schedule a viewing for the next day. I hung up, I took a deep breath. I didn't tell my son anything, it was still too early to explain. But something inside me clicked, as if a puzzle piece I'd been missing for years finally fell into place. For the first time, I was doing something for myself, not waiting for recognition, not begging for acceptance. I was taking action. And that, in itself, was a victory. The next day, while my parents were probably discussing among themselves that the dramatic Marcella had left without even helping to clean up, I was walking through the hallways of the house next door. It was simple, spacious, with a perfect backyard for planting and a gate that opened onto the back street. A discreet place with a separate entrance, but one that allowed me to be close and observe if necessary. Dona Lourdes accompanied me and explained the technical details, but my mind was elsewhere, in memories. I remembered the time my son fell at school, and I had to rush to pick him up because my parents said they had other commitments. The afternoon my sister mocked me, telling me I should be more grateful for still having a place to spend Christmas, as if a dinner without looking into my eyes was a gift. And I remembered, with pain, the night before. The phrase, "you'll eat the leftovers," hammered into my head like a nail being driven mercilessly. I bought the house that same afternoon, cash. With the money I'd saved for years, sacrificing weekends, postponing trips, saying no to my son when he wanted expensive toys. Not with anger, but with purpose. Because I knew my effort would one day take me to a better place. And now, this place had a number and an address. The following week, I moved in discreetly. I avoided noise, without a moving truck, just me and my son, with the help of a friend who had a pickup truck. I didn't want an audience. I didn't want to explain anything to anyone. It was my moment, and I wouldn't share it with anyone who never saw me as worthy of anything. The windows of the new house overlooked my parents' backyard. From my bedroom, I could see their kitchen window. Ironic how, even without meaning to, we were connected. They didn't know yet, nobody knew, and I was in no hurry. During the following days, I continued with my routine. I took my son to school, worked, and organized the rooms. The difference was that now, when I got home, I no longer felt the burden of being merely tolerated. It was my home, my ground. Then, the following Saturday, I heard my sister's voice on the other side of the wall. She was talking loudly on the phone, laughing and saying she couldn't even remember the name of Marcella's son's school. It didn't hurt anymore, now it gave me clarity. They never respected me. They never wanted to see me well. They always preferred to see me needing them, to feel superior. It was that very Saturday that I made a decision. I wouldn't just live there. I would prove that everything I'd built on my own was more solid and true than any facade my family presented to the world. And the first step would be to return, with class and determination, everything they'd made me feel throughout my life. But for that, I needed more than a house. I needed a plan, and it would start at the next family dinner. Because this time I would go by choice, not to please, not to be accepted, but to show them who I really am. The next few days were quiet, but my mind was racing. Every simple task in the new house, hanging a curtain, choosing where the living room rug would go, setting up my son's desk, was a reminder of how hard I fought to have my own space. For the first time, every detail around me had my touch, my choice, my story, and that was powerful. But even with this new freedom, there was something inside me that needed to be resolved. Not revenge, that wasn't what drove me. It was justice. It was as if I carried a debt with myself, an emotional reckoning with everything I'd been forced to swallow in silence for years. I knew they would never expect anything from me but submission, and that was precisely why they needed to see that the unnatural daughter raising a child alone was stronger, more capable, more worthy than they ever imagined. On Wednesday, I received a text from my mother, as if nothing had happened. "Marcella, let's have Sunday lunch. Show up with a boy, okay?" It was always like that. After the minor acts of violence, I accepted the invitation as a favor. As if their presence were something to be earned. But this time, I accepted it with ease. I wanted to be there. For me, not to participate in the family farce, but to expose, with my mere presence, the difference between appearance and reality. On Saturday night, I went grocery shopping. I made a homemade cake with pineapple filling, my dad's favorite. And on Sunday, I dressed my son in a nice outfit, carefully styled his hair, and wore something simple but elegant. Not because I wanted to impress, but because I knew they expected to see me looking haggard. And I wouldn't give that pleasure to anyone. We arrived at the appointed time. My mother opened the door and feigned surprise at seeing us so well dressed. "Hey, you guys really came. Did you call Mom? I thought you meant it." She gave that forced smile and let us in. The atmosphere was the same as always, my sister at the center of the conversation, her parents extolling her achievements, and sidelong glances when my son said something enthusiastically. During lunch, I made a point of complimenting the food, smiling politely, and even chatting with my sister's husband about work. He was visibly uncomfortable with my confidence. My sister looked at me as if trying to figure out what had changed. And my father, between bites, asked disdainfully, "And you, Marcella, are you still doing that housework?" I smiled. That was predictable, yes. In fact, now I have some larger clients, even companies. They didn't hide their surprise. It was as if I'd broken the script they'd written for me. And their reaction fueled me. At the end of lunch, my mother got up with 2 plates full of leftovers and placed them on the table. "Take this here, give it to your son." Kids don't care about these things, do they? It was at that moment that I looked her straight in the eye and said, in a calm voice, "He doesn't need leftovers, Mom. We have food at home. In fact, we have our own home now." There was immediate silence. My sister dropped the glass she was holding. My father raised his eyebrows. And then, as if it were impossible to contain herself, my sister blurted out, "What do you mean? Where are you living now?" "In that house next door. I bought it, cash. Now it's mine." My mother's face drained of color. She looked at her husband, then at me, and then back again, as if trying to figure out if it was true. My father groaned and scratched his head, but didn't say anything. Then my sister forced a mocking laugh. "Became neighbors. How convenient." "Just a coincidence," I replied. "But it's good to know I can observe up close the people who really matter in my life. And you know I'm not talking about you." My mother tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. Their expressions weren't one of embarrassment, yet. They were one of confusion. As if they were seeing, for the first time, the woman I truly was. And that was just the beginning. That night, when I got home, my son hugged me tightly before going to sleep. And I said softly, "Mom, today I felt important." I held back tears because I knew he was. It always was. We just needed a space to be recognized, even if it was by ourselves. And that very night, I began writing the next step of the plan. There were still more truths to be brought to the table, and the right moment was approaching. The house next door became more than home. It was the symbol of everything I'd built without help, without applause, without the slightest recognition. And now that I was there, close enough for them to see my evolution up close, I began to notice a subtle movement. Not of approximation, but of unease. The week after lunch, my mother appeared in front of my house for the first time. She clapped discreetly on the gate, as if hesitant, as if unsure if she was welcome. "I just came to see how you are," she said, fixing her hair with a nervousness I'd known since childhood but never imagined seeing in my mother. She opened the gate and I invited her in. She looked around, surprised by the organization, the new furniture, the delicate and welcoming decor. And then she blurted out, as if she couldn't swallow, "You managed to put all this together by yourself." I smiled. "I did it with effort, but yes, alone." She didn't know what to say. She feigned interest for a few minutes, complimented the cake I'd left cooling on the counter, and left, saying she'd be back later. I never imagined seeing my achievement would leave her so disconcerted. But I realized then that my presence bothered them more than my absence. Later that afternoon, while sweeping the front porch, I heard my sister in our parents' backyard, her voice raised. "So now she's the powerful one, is that it? Everyone's licking her ass because she bought a house. Always thinking she's the one being wronged, the poor thing." That was it. The narrative that had always been maintained, that I was fragile, ungrateful, inferior, was under threat. And she didn't know how to deal with it. Because, to them, I was only acceptable when I was at the bottom. When I was used as a comparison, my sister would shine even brighter. Now, with my stability and firm stance, the scales began to shift. But I didn't fight back. I didn't even say anything. My silence was what bothered them the most. I no longer offered excuses or sought approval. And the emptiness left by this lack of submission echoed louder than any scream. The following week, I received a note through the crack in the gate. It was from my sister. "If you think so highly of yourself, why don't you come to your nephew's birthday party on Saturday? It would be nice to show that you're still part of the family, if you still are." It wasn't an invitation. It was a provocation. A desperate attempt to bring me back to the role they knew, that of the outcast trying to fit in. But against all my will, I decided to go. Not for them, but for my son, who still had one of the few family figures he truly connected with in his cousin. And deep down, something told me that night would be decisive. We arrived late in the afternoon. My parents' backyard was decorated with balloons and children's music. The table was packed as always, but when we walked in, everything went silent for a few seconds. My sister looked me up and down and said with a wry smile, "Wow, you really came." "Yes, I did." "My son was invited," I replied, smiling back, not giving in to the provocation. I made a point of greeting everyone cordially. I didn't ask permission to be in that space. My son ran off to play, while I stood, chatting with a childhood friend who was among the guests. During the party, I noticed my sister's discomfort as she noticed other people coming up to me to compliment my new house. People she herself had invited. The news had spread. The woman who had always been left out was now remembered not for her hardships, but for her recovery. And then, as night approached, my father, who had kept his distance during the party, approached with a glass in his hand. He stopped beside me without looking me in the eye and said, "I never thought you'd make it. I thought you'd fall flat on your face. But yeah, you did it." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement he could muster. Coming from him, it was practically an apology, but I didn't smile back. I just said I just needed to be left alone, and now that they have, I've blossomed. He was silent. Finally, he nodded and walked away. That night, walking back down the lighted street with my son, he held my hand tightly and said, "Mommy, now it seems they've seen the real you." I took a deep breath. I knew they were beginning to see, but they hadn't yet grasped the weight of what they'd done. They hadn't yet truly felt regret. And that moment was yet to come. After the party, my family's behavior changed, not out of affection, but out of convenience. My parents began showing up at my door more often with random excuses, returning a pot that didn't exist, asking to borrow a tool, or feigning concern for my son. My sister, however, disappeared. No note, no provocation. Her silence was a clear sign of discomfort. One day, while cleaning the yard, I heard a heated argument coming from next door. It was my parents and my sister, talking loudly, unaware that the wall was too thin to hide their shame. How could Ruggiero have lost his job? It was my mother's voice, desperate. I already said it was a company decision. My sister yelled. And no, Mom, he no longer has the salary he used to. We're going to have to cut a lot of things. What about the renovation of the gourmet area? My father asked. You're still paying. I know, she replied, excited. I know all of that. But do you think it's easy? And now Marcella is right there beside me, with everything in place, as if she were the successful daughter in the story. Hearing that was like confirming something I already knew. For them, other people's happiness was only bearable when my life was in ruins. My growth was a threat, not a source of pride. But now that their tide was turning, the comparison weighed heavily. Not because I wanted it to be that way, but because they'd always made a point of measuring me from below. And now, for the first time, the reflection they saw in the mirror no longer flattered anyone. 2 days later, my sister showed up at my gate. She was visibly dejected. Her hair was disheveled, her expression weary. She held a briefcase in her hands. "May I come in?" she asked bluntly. I nodded and opened the gate. She walked in, scanning every corner of the house with a look of a mixture of shock and embarrassment. "I need to talk," she said, sitting down on the living room sofa. "Make yourself at home." "You know Ruggiero was fired, right?" "I heard something like that," I replied, maintaining my composure. "The debts are piling up. My son's school, the credit card, the mortgage for the new apartment in our parents' house. All in our name." She paused. She looked into my eyes. "For the first time in years, I saw sincerity. I've been very unfair to you, my whole life. But now I understand what it's like to not be a priority. My parents are pressuring us as if it's none of their responsibility, as if it's our fault for listening to them." I took a deep breath. I could have thrown it all in her face. I could have told her I told you so, or just closed the door. But there was something there, in that human desperation, that paralyzed me for a moment. "And what do you want from me?" I asked calmly. "I don't want money," she replied quickly. "But I wanted to know if you could recommend me to some of your contacts. I know you have clients. I know you're doing well. I just want to work." The irony of that reminded me of all the times I'd been called a failure, a dead weight, a disgrace to the family. But there she was, the perfect daughter, asking for help from the one who had always been treated as a last resort. "I'll think about it," I replied. Not out of revenge, but because these days I carefully consider who enters and leaves my life. She nodded, embarrassed. The visit didn't last long. When she left, my son came into the room and hugged me. "Are you going to help her?" "I don't know yet, son. Sometimes, the ones who hurt the most are the ones who least accept help. And sometimes, helping those who hurt us is only possible when they truly change." 2 days later, it was my parents' turn to knock on my door. They came together, my father with a closed expression, my mother nervous. They sat on the porch without asking permission. I didn't stop them. "Marcella," my mother began. "Things are tough at home. You know, your sister's struggling, Ruggerio's unemployed, and we can't handle it all alone." "They never did," I replied dryly. She tried to hide it, but my father was blunt. "You were always firm. She worked, raised her son alone, and today she's fine. Can't you help a little?" The silence that followed was heavy. I looked into their eyes and saw, for the first time, not superiority, but fear. Fear of no longer being needed. Fear of seeing their neglected daughter become self-sufficient. "No," I replied firmly. "I won't help those who never helped me when I needed it. Those who gave me scraps, those who made me feel inferior. I fought so hard to get here, And I won't let my son see his mother being used again. My mother started to cry. My father lowered his head. The penny was beginning to sink in. Regret came not as a scream, but as a bitter whisper, impossible to ignore. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in a long time, because I knew the next step would be the end of a cycle. The days that followed were silent. No note from my sister, no visit from my parents. But I knew it wasn't the end of the story. This was simply the moment when each of us needed to look at ourselves and, for the first time, reflect without excuses, without distractions. On a rainy, calm Sunday morning, I decided to do something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage to do: host a luncheon. At my house. With only the people I wanted around. I invited two close friends, my son's teacher, who was always so kind to him, and an elderly neighbor who helped me a lot with the move. I also invited a coworker who always believed in my potential, even when I doubted it. And of course, my son, who was the first to sit at the table, wearing a white shirt, his eyes shining with pride. "Mom, I've never seen this table so beautiful." And it was. I set it carefully, arranging plates and glasses simply but neatly, and fresh flowers in the center. It was more than just lunch, it was a declaration. A silent message to myself: I won, and I won my way. As we were serving the food and the sound of laughter filled the room, there was a light knock at the gate. Everyone stopped. I calmly got up and went to look. It was my mother. Alone. She was wet from the drizzle, her hair tied up haphazardly, her face swollen like someone who had cried more than once that day. "Sorry to show up like this," he said. "I heard the voices, the smell of food, it just made me want to come." We stood there, face to face. For a moment, I felt small again, that girl who always wanted to be noticed. But she was gone. "Are you hungry?" I asked, my tone neutral. She nodded silently. "I have food, but I don't have any more room at the table." She looked at me, not understanding. "For many years, Mom, I ate leftovers. Not just food, but love, attention, respect. And at that dinner, when you said my son and I would eat whatever was left, it destroyed me inside. But it also woke me up." She started crying. "I didn't know we hurt you so much, I did." He just didn't care. Not out of malice, perhaps, but out of convenience. Because it was easier to look at my sister as the successful one and treat me as a burden. Because it was comfortable to keep things the way they always were. "But now that I've changed, you're scared." She swallowed hard. "We made mistakes, daughter, a lot. I can't change the past." "I don't want him to change either. He taught me. He made me grow. It made me strong. But now, I decide who sits at my table. And for that, being blood isn't enough. It has to be presence. It has to be truth." She lowered her head. The sound of laughter from lunch still echoed in the background. "I just wanted to say I regret it," he whispered. "I hope so. And I hope you learn, not for me but for yourself." I gave her a plate of hot food, carefully wrapped. It wasn't revenge, it was respect for me. She accepted it silently and left. I returned to the table. My son ran to me and hugged me. "Will she change, Mom? Maybe. But we don't depend on that anymore, do we?" He smiled. At that lunch, for the first time, I felt whole. Not because I'd acquired a house or because I'd turned things around. But because I chose who to share what I built with. And I finally understood it wasn't about them. It was about me. And at that table, there were no more scraps. Only presence, affection, and truth. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this. This really helps our work reach more people. Now tell me in the comments, would you have done the same as this daughter? Would you have the courage to set boundaries even with someone who always belittles you? I'd love to hear your opinion. And please also mention which city you're watching this video from so I can add a special heart to your comment. Oh, and if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video. Sometimes, a story like this is all someone needs to find strength and start over. See you in the next video.